Good afternoon. This is Jim Snyder discussing my week 3 and 4 Cocos2D-X project for emerging technologies for mobile games. I want to begin by apologizing if this is hard to hear at times. I've been hoarse for a few days, been rather sick, so at any rate, I wanted to discuss what my plans would have been had I been able to complete this project. This first screenshot here is the Hello World, basically the main project or sample project that comes up when you first initialize a new project in the Cocos2D-X environment. And as you can see by the screenshot, I was able to get that up and running in the Xcode toolkit emulating an iOS device. Unfortunately, as I was trying to get this to work, I could not get it to operate on either a the Mac environment or even over on my PC for Android. I was able to get fairly close in the Eclipse environment on my Windows PC, but it kept returning build errors that there was no real indication as to what was going on. There were the typical warnings that something, like unused variables or unused references, things like that, sort of the typical kind of stuff, but nothing that seemed to indicate what exactly was going on. The reason I spent so much time focused on the Cocos2D-X environment is that I really wanted to have the opportunity to see what kind of a tool I could use to create 2D games, and it seemed like this would be the ideal choice, but it didn't seem to click for me. I'm not sure if others had better luck than I, but I really just could not get this to function in an Android environment. Now, the question might be raised, well, why focus so much on Android? And in truth, had I any means to export the project to an iOS device and actually see how it worked, I would certainly have done so, but unless something has changed, I don't think we're set up for development on iOS devices yet, and I don't have any means of loading to the iPod that I have here, which sort of limits me to doing mobile testing for the Android device, the Nexus tablet that's here, or one of my other Android devices. So that's really why I was trying to get this to operate on the Android device. Now, I did look at a couple of other options for doing this. One was to work within Unreal, the UDK engine, but in order to export to Android, everything that I saw indicated that I had to purchase a full license, and I don't have that kind of money laying around, unfortunately. But believe me, I would love to have one, but yeah. And then the other was Project Anarchy, but again, that seems to be focused primarily on 3D rather than 2D. I did begin to look at Unity for a 2D development, and the game that I was trying to create was very simple, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But it really relied a lot on on-screen, on-touch events to sort of go back and forth in a multiplayer environment. And everything I was reading in research for how to handle an on-click event or an on-touch event really sort of made it seem a lot more complicated than a 2D program would require. And so I did go back and try to get Cocos to work yet again, because I really think if I can get beyond this, that would be the way to go. But unfortunately, that did not happen. So I will continue to push forward on this even outside of class, because I think it would be a great tool to learn. I just presently do not have it doing what needs to be done. So, just to talk a little bit about the game itself, I was basically intending to put together a simple two-player version of tic-tac-toe. I know it seems like a very simplistic game, but I figured it would be something that would be nice and easy to tackle that was multiplayer. And so, one thing to keep in mind is that the graphics here are sort of representative of my early thoughts for the game as I was exploring the code that I could use to handle simple multiplayer stuff through the Android game service. I discovered that I really wouldn't need to differentiate between start game and join game, that essentially I could use the service to pair players together, so one player would click start game and it would sort of put him into a waiting queue for another player to come along. And so anyway, so this menu would actually have been a little bit simpler. Would simply have just had the start game and the quit button on it. But so essentially, it just was going to go back and forth between two players. One thing that I did want to tackle was the ambient light sensor in addition to the multiplayer. And so for the ambient light sensor, I had set up two different sets of graphics that would simply change based on the light level indicated by the ambient light sensor. Now, this isn't really a fancy use of the light sensor. Basically, I just inverted the graphics from one to another, one set to another set, so that it created a visual difference. If I was really going to implement the ambient light sensor, I would actually do it with more inside of an actual game. I would have done it with more purpose rather than just simply swapping out graphic palettes. But for an initial experiment, it would certainly have made sense just to swap the graphics out. So essentially the orange version would have appeared were the light level normal, and this blue version would have appeared had the light level been on the dark end of the spectrum. So just to sort of indicate what would have happened had there been an implementation of the ambient light sensor in the actual end game. This is an actual representation of the game screen as it would have appeared. Obviously, the game would have simply played in portrait mode rather than landscape. It just made sense to me with the sort of layout of the board and everything to just go for a normal portrait handset orientation. Honestly, in a more robust version of the game, it probably would make sense to have a couple of different layouts and then let the player choose, because there's really, given the size of the board, there's really no specific reason to keep it in one orientation or another, but it would require a little bit of reformatting where the labels such as the your turn, indicating that it's the one player's turn, would appear on a landscape orientation, because obviously it would run off the screen if we just flipped this 90 degrees sideways. So but essentially the black circles would have been where the touch events would have occurred. So as a player, you would simply tap where you wanted to place your X or O, the initial version was not going to have any confirmation because I wanted to focus more on the multiplayer and ambient sensor parts of it, so it simply would have placed your X or O, which, by the way, I was going to have determined randomly. Once a game started, it would randomly determine which player went first for any particular match, because obviously with tic-tac-toe sometimes whoever gets to go first it has sort of an advantage. So that would have been handled by random determination, but obviously in a sort of, I don't know if I'd call it more robust version, but a more player-friendly version, tapping one of the circles would have brought up a confirmation, is this where you want to play your X or O, before flipping it over to the other player. And of course, when it was the other player's turn, on the one player's screen, it would then switch from your turn to waiting for other player, just something to keep the players informed as to what was going on, so that it wasn't just a case of just waiting around for the other person to do something without having any indication. And then once the game was won, lost, or tied, after if one of the players were to win, the message would be replaced with "you win" on the winning player's game, "you lose" on the losing player's game, and simply tie game on both screens if both players had lost, or not, well, if there had been a tie, not if both players had lost. Anyway, if there had been a tie, and then there would be a continue button, and then from that continue button it would take you to a final screen where it would present you with play again or quit, and quit would take you back to the main menu where you could leave the game in its entirety or start another game, hopefully get faced up with another player. Play again would simply join you back together with that same player, and so you would continue to play. And so essentially that would have been the full version of the game that I was planning on implementing. Like I say, the difficulties in getting Cocos2D-X running really sort of prohibited me from getting anywhere deep on this. I honestly started to feel like for the game that I was trying to do, it would have made more sense to just go with a fully native implementation using the Android development kit rather than trying to do it in Cocos. That's not to say that I don't think there is value in Cocos. I certainly do. With my experience from Unity in the first 2 weeks, it certainly made sense to be able to port something over between two different platforms with ease, rather than having to go back and recode the same game for two different platforms. And my understanding is that this is what Cocos would offer, so it definitely makes sense to get to know it, and I'm definitely going to keep hammering through it, trying to figure out why I'm not getting it to operate in an Android environment, because obviously, even assuming that I could test on an iPhone or an iPod or any of the iOS devices, that would be great, but then, yeah, being unable to test on an Android device would sort of limit my confidence that it would port well, just based on, hey, make a APK and send it out and pray for the best. So really, I definitely understand that the need to learn Cocos is there, or some other similar authoring tool. I did look for other authoring tools that might have helped accomplish this 2D program. I really didn't come across any, but it may have been more out of frustration with trying to get Cocos done that I wasn't exactly focused on finding another well, and between that and the yeah, Anarchy and UDK, sort of looking around, I probably got a little frustrated in just finding something to do this in, but anyhow, I definitely will press forward on trying to learn Cocos, but I wanted to provide some sort of video explanation as to what my intentions were, at least, and be able to present something to indicate what my overall goals were. So, thank you very much.